1 million lost from poorly managed SAP licenses. That's not a dramatic marketing slogan. This happens basically all the time unless we get involved. And that's exactly what we're talking about today in a hands-on practical way, because this isn't a one-off case. A lot of organizations already have an SAP licensing problem without even knowing it. And we're in business to change that. We've got the right approach, the right tools, and the right experts. Two of them are here with us today. Number one, Tony Wise, Vice President of APAC and Middle East, who, among many other things, used to lead an SAP audit team himself and knows exactly what to look out for. Tony?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here and pleased you could join today.
And Joanna Miku, leading technical consultant, naturally sharp and focused when it comes to automatic license optimization. Joanna?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here today with you.
Excellent. Let's have a look. You're looking at a real customer case, and we're going to look through the first part of the columns. Tony, do you want to jump in here and explain us what we're seeing actually?
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. Now, everyone who's joined our webinars previously will have seen this screen before, but let me quickly explain what we're looking at here. The second column, user types in the contract. Yes, this is an ECC contract, but it could easily be an S/4HANA contract. Our tooling and our services cover all the aspects of SAP licensing. But this is ECC, so column 2 is what the customers purchased, and column 3 is the quantity they've purchased. Column 4, where it says customer measurement. This is the column, this is the measurement that the customer themselves, this is the classification of the licenses that the customer themselves have put into the system. And in this particular case, these are the measurements that they submitted to SAP. As you can see from the compliance status, what they've declared to SAP is significantly non-compliant. And that 2.9 million USD based on list price, as people may be familiar, SAP's verification clause states that audit findings are based on list price. So in this particular case, this is what SAP came to the customer saying that they owed. Now, unfortunately,
how come this happens, Tony? Sorry to go back to the purchase licenses. How come I'm not sort of getting exactly what I will need because it's based on wrong assumptions, or how is that even possible?
It's possible in a number of ways, particularly for ECC customers who have had their contracts for, by definition, a decade plus. When they purchase the licenses, let's make a very nice assumption. When they purchased the licenses, they worked with SAP to proactively understand what they required. SAP didn't try to make them buy licenses they didn't need. And let's just assume that over time, no, at the beginning, everything was squeaky clean. That's not often the case, but let's just make that assumption today. 10, 15, 20 years later, everything's changed in your environment. So your users have changed, your business may even have changed, your requirements, the number of people in your organization, the need of your users in your SAP system. All these things have changed, but your contract has stayed the same. And so it's very, very easy for customers, and this is just one scenario, it's very, very easy for customers to think they're okay, but very easily to get out of compliance or to think they're out of compliance just by the process. And just to give you one quick anecdote, when I used to work in auditing, one of the first questions I used to ask SAP customers was how they classified their users. What was the classification criteria they used and where was it documented? And unfortunately, on the vast majority of occasions, everyone in the room sort of looked at each other, expecting that they must have this document somewhere, otherwise how do they manage their licensing? And very often, no one had it. So in answer to your question, Stefan, it's very easy to get to a situation where the licenses don't map your requirements. And it's also very easy for the customers to misclassify their licenses because no one really keeps track of it. And also, even if with the best of intentions, it's very easy for there to be a disconnect between the people who sign the contract, and the basis team who actually make those classifications in the system.
So during all of that time, I wouldn't have much help from SAP to actually have a look if whether my licenses is fine. But when the audit starts, they're pretty precise on finding what's actually not matching the usage then.
When the audit starts, remember, in a standard SAP audit, SAP relies upon the customer to do the classification. So if the customer doesn't know what they're doing, then they can easily submit information that is just plain wrong without even knowing why it's wrong. That's the danger. So
that's why you're always saying be in control and don't just wait for somebody to point out something to you.
Yeah, as I was going to say, I mean, this particular customer came to us when they already had a problem. When SAP was bashing down their door for money. The ideal customer, the ideal approach, of course, would be to proactively manage this. And as we can see when we go to the next slides, if the customer had proactively managed this situation just wouldn't have arisen at all. But in this one, they came to us, 2.9 million bill. How can you get us out of this situation? And their immediate thought process was, how can we reduce this bill as much as we possibly can? And so this is where this 1 million comes from. Even if they'd managed to get a 66% discount, that still would have been a 1 million USD exposure for this particular customer.
So one could argue 3 million, but yeah, we didn't talk about the price. We didn't, renegotiate, and some might actually still be happy with what they got as a discount. And you say there is more to it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, a lot of customers would be happy to get their bill down from 3 million to 1 million. But I don't know of any customers who want to pay 1 million that they don't need to spend. And so let's move on to the next bit. So just for context for everyone who's listening, this was the starting point. The customer came to us. They asked us to reevaluate their environment, make sure that what they were submitting to SAP was even accurate, and then if it was accurate or whatever the results, to help them renegotiate with SAP to get this price down, or hopefully even removed. So let's look at this revised chart. So the real use of licenses per SAMQ. SAMQ, our SAMQ SAP tooling looks at license requirements based on what the users actually do. And when we come to Joanna in a minute, she can show you exactly how that works in the tooling. But the column that says real use of licenses, this is what SAMQ identified that the customer actually needed. And as you can see, it's a very, very, very different story to what they had submitted to SAP. And this is when I come back to, if they'd proactively done this, if they'd worked with us up front and then submitted the data to SAP, there wouldn't have even been a conversation about how much they need to pay. Because as you can see, there's a big surplus. This company was actually over licensed, not under licensed. I won't go into the details of how we negotiated this and how we managed to get rid of the bill completely. It obviously took a few months to get to that stage in the negotiation, and a lot of effort for the customer to go through that angst of this painful bill hanging over them. So yes, we managed to get rid of it, but it could have been avoided completely if we'd been working together up front. So yeah, so that's this one would have cost the customer $1 million, even if they'd managed to negotiate a 66% discount. Working with us, it all went away, albeit it took a few months to go away.
So you're saying clean up before actually you have somebody look at your SAP environment, your license environment?
Clean up if necessary. Proactively manage would be best practice. Keep on top of it all the time. Don't just wait for an event and then sort of get into panic mode either before or post the audit. That would be a recommendation. But either way, whether you do it sort of proactively, or whether you do it on an ongoing basis, whether you do it only when audit comes around, yeah, make sure you understand what you're submitting to SAP before you submit it. Definitely.
And definitely not have the idea to try to do this manually, like, every couple of weeks and try to count who's doing what and who's looking at what.
When
So Joanna,
you've got thousands of users, it becomes almost untenable to do it manually. Certainly.
Joanna smiling because knowing that's exactly the job SAMQ does.
Exactly.
Okay. This won't happen to me. This is just a very rare case, Tony. It's 1 million. There must have been some people who didn't really think their jobs through, and a high level of incompetence. Would you say yes to that?
Yeah, you sort of like to think so, but we have jobs, and SAP auditors have jobs because that's not the case. In our experience, almost no one has their licensing correct. Whether they're over licensed or under licensed is a different issue, but both of them have risks, of course. If you're over licensed, it means you're paying far too much than you need to. If you're under licensed, then you're always waiting for the SAP audit to come and hammer you for some unbudgeted expenses and to use it as leverage over to get you to the next stage of the SAP sales process. So unfortunately, it's not the exceptional circumstances that you might hope for.
Okay, should we go to practice mode and have a look how this actually works?
Sure, I think, I think it's very easy for me to say, but I think it's much nicer for people to actually see. So this is where Joanna comes in. Thank you.
So
Joanna.
before I share my screen, I just want to say a few sentences, a bit on the preparation and the process itself for the tool. So I'll show you in our system, where these values come from that filled the table or the slides before. But just a little bit of context. So our tool, SAMQ, is a license optimization tool for SAP systems. So our prep or our process is usually to deliver transports to the customers for them to install the tool in one system. And then the tool would collect data from the target systems being the measurement relevant systems. So the tool will extract license relevant information on engines, digital access, other things, but our focus today will be on the users. So we read data on the users and their activity. That's the key point. The tool would identify the license the users need based on what have they actually done in the system. And this process is obviously automated, so the tool would read the data daily or weekly, depending on the size and the runtime, and would run this optimization process periodically so that the users, the optimal license is identified periodically for each of the users, and the tool would also assign the license in the target system so that this preparation for the yearly audit or measurement is as smooth as possible, and obviously as the license is optimal always in the system. You would have reports up to date to see what the consumption is, even if you're not being currently audited, and it takes away this uncertainty that Tony you mentioned earlier, that it feels like every customer has its own process on how to deal with licenses, how to assign what the logic is for the assignment, and our tool has best practices and is assigning the licenses based on fixed rules so that it's compliant and optimal. Then it's basically consistently applied to the users and their activity in the landscape. Okay, so this is how one of our reports looks like. We like to call it the SAMQ report, but it's one of the reports the tool produces. This one is the main report focused on named user licenses. And the values in this report are not identical to the slides that Tony shared earlier. This is our demo system, so we obviously don't have data from that customer that was shown earlier. So it's supposed to show you, I'm going to show you how the tool would work and not have actual customer values in here. But this report is consolidated. So we have here all the measurement relevant systems combined and consolidated. We see the license types as in the slide Tony showed earlier, the inventory of this demo customer, The license is assigned in the target systems. So what USMM and SAP's license administration workbench SLAW would be able to read in a measurement. So in this scenario, we would have purchased 2,800 professional licenses. There are 4,048 users that have been assigned a professional license in the systems, which would show up in a measurement. Whereas the tool says that after optimization, 1,414 users only would need this license type. Now, as mentioned earlier, the tool is collecting data on the user's transaction history, and that's the basis for the assignment. So I'll show you a few examples so that you can see what this is based on. Just as you can tell, we have here just the values on the users, but there's also a tab here focusing on the costs. We have here the prices per units based in euros without discounts and the cost calculation for the totals. But I'm gonna skip now to this sheet
So
that
you
contains.
could theoretically, excuse me, you could theoretically adapt this to your own costs and to the actual license price that you paid, just to see realistic numbers.
Exactly. So the inventory and the price, of course, is adjustable, and we would enter the values of the customer's contract and what the customer paid for in here. But for demo purposes, we have the standard
Of
list
course.
price without any discounts in here, and in this case, in euros.
And so
for the
everybody's looking at their
example.
live figures basically and seeing the system. Okay, get it.
Exactly. So then we have here a sheet. It's going to show all users from all systems what license type they have in the target system, what license type they would have that's optimized. Unfortunately, the table would be quite big if we were to put in the descriptions as well. So we just have the IDs, 54 meaning an employee, business with employee license. And I'll just filter for some example users just to show you. To show you the examples, 1 second. Okay, so I selected a few users that would potentially be a good example. We would have this user called Alex. This user has been assigned a professional license in the target system, the system I01, where the tool says the user actually needs a business with employee license. Why is that? We can have a look at the activity data of the user and see what transaction the user has accessed. Now, this user has a session manager, which means the user has logged in. And this activity, BI client runtime, means the user accessed business warehouse reports. So essentially, the user only viewed BI reports, and has not had any other activity in the system. A professional license would be quite expensive for a basic activity of viewing data, viewing reports. It's very hard to keep track of what users actually do in the system. So imagine somebody joins your company and then has very little activity, then maybe 3 years later gets promoted, has a different responsibility, his activity profile changes, and so on. These things can change, not as frequent as 3 years or even quicker. Users may go on extended leave, they can leave the company, it's possible they don't need their access actually. Or imagine you'd have, let's say, a head of the finance department, which you maybe think would need a professional license, but a head of the department may not actually log in to create data in the systems, create financial documents. His responsibility or her responsibility may be more managerial, people management, rather than actual finance activities. So he may be okay with just a manager self-service license instead of an actual professional license.
So what Tony said beforehand, it's like when you have thousands of users, the chance that you're losing track of what's happening there is pretty big, as far as I understand it. And probably are there cases where people just take licenses just in case I might be using this? I might give myself all the admin rights that I might need to use something just in case, so I don't actually drop out of it.
What does happen in my experience interacting with customers, where we do ask them what their process was before that, how they've assigned licenses, what was their logic. It is obviously does happen and frequently happens that a basis person or the person who's assigning the license in a cleanup before a measurement is going the safe way, and if they're not sure They rather give them a more expensive license to be sure that there's no compliance risk. Whereas the user may actually need a really low license type. So if we go just here as an example, also assign the professional license, and our tool says the user needs an employee self-service license. And here we also see the user has only travel expense manager, obviously not requiring an expensive license. And maybe just one more example that the thing can go also both ways. So we also have a situation of this user where the customer, the other way, sorry, the last one, where the customer assigned a limited professional. No, I was right, sorry. Customer assigned an employee, and we say limited professional. It should go this one. ESS license assigned in by the customer in the target system, and SAMQ says limited professional, potentially a similar situation. Quite extensive activity, as you can see here. It can go towards a more expensive license as well. This is also potentially a compliance risk. So if you assign a user an employee license, but the user actually is having complex activity in the system, for example, maintaining billing lists, SD, logistics, basis transaction, maybe some finance transactions as well, a more expensive license may be needed. So it's not always optimizing to a cheaper license. It can also get optimized to a more expensive license so that you're still compliant with the use rights.
Get it. Tony, we try to find practical examples of what can happen, how people could recognize that they might have the same problem Joanna just mentioned.
The only way you find out is by either having a very, very robust process in place, or you have a tooling such as SAMQ to make sure you're on top of it all the time. As I mentioned earlier, it's very, very easy with no ill intent whatsoever to fall into a situation where your licensing is not accurately tracked. So it happens all the time, Stefan. This is not just a one-off. As I say, I don't think we'd be in a situation where we are, where we have hundreds of customers trusting us with our tooling and our services every year, if this were just a one-off rare event. This happens all the time, unfortunately.
That's not the only way to save the million, Tony.
No, it's a very good way to start to save a million, though. As I say, we always recommend proactive approach to managing your SAP licenses. But let's assume you've got your house in order. Let's assume that everything's squeaky clean. You know exactly what you've got. You know exactly what your users are doing. You know exactly the licensing implication and costs. Of course, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, this was a very good way to help you negotiate with SAP. But as we all know, in fact, since 2015, since the advent of S/4HANA, and now more recently since RISE with SAP, everyone knows that SAP is pushing people to get onto S/4HANA by 2027, but B, really pushing them to get on to RISE with SAP, the SAP managed environment. And so this is the next stage of the decision-making process. So yes, you've got your house in order, fantastic. You sit back, you take a deep breath, and then suddenly you realize that SAP is knocking on your door to make this next massive move. Even if you're on S/4HANA already, what we've just described is just as valid in the S/4HANA on-premise environment as it is anywhere else. And we even have customers in a private cloud RISE environment doing exactly these things as well. But let's say you're on ECC or S/4HANA on-premise, SAP is coming to you and saying you need to move to RISE or you need to move to S/4HANA. If you're on ECC, how do you validate which one you want to go to? How do you identify the costs associated with that? How do you know which one is right for you? And if we go to the next slide, there are some very, very big differences in the options that are available to you. So as part of our services, we have tooling called VOQUZ as well, Business Case Builder, which we complement with SAMQ to do all of this analysis around the various different options available to customers as they continue their SAP evolution. So believe it or not, many customers are still talking about staying on ECC. Many customers are talking about moving to S/4HANA on premise. Many customers are talking about moving to S/4HANA with a hyperscaler, which is still an on-premise licensing scenario. And of course, this RISE with SAP with multiple different flavors, depending upon what SLA you have, what infrastructure you have, these all come into play. And so as part of that work that we do on helping customers evaluate which option is right for them, as I said before, we do this TCO analysis, which goes across not only the licenses, which is where we historically specialized, but also the services, the infrastructure, and basically everything to do with moving your licenses into that environment.
So you're saying we can compare scenarios beforehand with real numbers. What would have a decision like that been before VOQUZ business case builder? What would it be based on? It's just a strategy, a thought, people talking, speaking while drinking a coffee and making the decision that's worth a couple of million, a couple of 100 million?
In some cases, yes, but let's assume that most customers want to do this at least at a rudimentary level. This is a lot of work. So for people who don't do this day in, day out, this is a huge amount of effort without necessarily knowing that you're getting the best information, because a lot of the information is gleaned from SAP. And I'm not saying that SAP deliberately misleads people, but SAP has a vested interest in making sure that they go a certain direction. So having someone like us, a third-party advisor, to not only ensure that their current licensing is accurate, but to understand their future demand, to understand everything that they require in their environment, to come up with all this commercial analysis before engaging SAP, is a wonderful way of ensuring that you have the right strategy when you engage. If you wait for SAP to try to push you, you're already on the back foot. Of course, we work with customers who already have a RISE proposal, and we help them to evaluate it and do all this analysis backwards. But again, the proactive approach, we always recommend that customers do all this work up front, really understand what they're getting into, understand what's involved, what's included, what's not included. And the numbers are very hard to see on this slide, at least they are for me. But these are millions and millions of dollars difference between the various different scenarios. And sometimes, of course, the money is not the only criteria for a customer. They have other interests, other needs in their organization, but understanding what the cost implications are before you go in to negotiate with SAP makes all the difference, in my opinion.
So one could actually say it's not even SAP's job to look at your organization and the structure and everything that you need to. That you're responsible for your own numbers, and then you might even get a proper advice or something. But there is no chance that one could do this without having an overview like this. That's how I understand it.
If you're going to do it right, and you're not going to do it over a cup of coffee or a meeting with the CIO in a restaurant late at night, then yes, this is what you need to do. If you do it yourself, absolutely, that's 100% everyone's choice. But just be aware that it's a lot of work, a lot of things that you need to take into account, a lot of information buried sometimes in SAP's websites, or maybe not even there at all. And if you're relying upon salespeople to try and give you guidance as what's best for your organization, salespeople by definition want to maximize revenue. So it's
talking about by definition maximizing revenue, the comparison here.
Exactly. These are very, very simple examples. I'm sure people will understand that we can't give customer names, but these are real examples where we've worked with customers to either renegotiate their contract, to migrate to S/4HANA, or migrate to RISE. Very significant differences in the before and after scenarios. So these are the types of results that we achieve on a daily basis. The numbers may look high and you may think are irrelevant to your organization, but that rise number down the bottom, that's a relatively small customer. So even with a relatively small customer, you can save a lot of money over the term of your contract.
So let's say I did all this and I understand I need to clean up my licensing landscape, and I actually use the business case builder to build my case on real numbers, on my organization's numbers, and not just theory and a cup of coffee and maybe, I don't know. What then? I did this once. Is there anything else how to maintain it and keep it up on track?
Yeah, so I guess this leads into our final topic. Yes, so you can pat yourself on the back. You've done your initial work, so you've got your licensing sorted out. You've done your next step, and you've negotiated a fantastic contract with SAP that meets your requirements, that gives you the right terms and conditions. You've got a decent price for it, and everyone is looking at themselves really quite happy that you're moving ahead with SAP on the right foot. But how do you make sure that that is the same situation in 2 years' time? This is where we go back to that proactive approach about managing your SAP environment. And no one will be surprised to learn that VOQUZ Labs also has a solution for that. Something that we call our advisory queue FinOps manager environment, making sure that you understand what you're using, and not only what you're using, but the financial implications of what you're using, all in one platform, all in one place, so that you have visibility all the time on what you need and your situation. It's a very important step. It's something obviously we're going to be talking about next time, Stefan. But as I say, just because you've negotiated that contract that everyone's happy with, remember the contract that you signed 20 years ago that everyone was happy with, that cost our customer almost cost our customer $3 million. That's where you could be next time you speak. So make sure you have it under control.
So that was a sneak preview on the advisory queue FinOps manager, and a top level overview of what you can do about your SAP licensing and how to build your cases with Advisory Queue Business Case Builder. Thanks, Joanna. Thanks, Tony. We're going to go over to the Q&A session now. Open for the questions. And if you want an individual look at your system, there is also the possibility to do a POC with us. Talk to Tony about details and your very individual case. And other than that, let's see what happens in the Q&A session now, I'd say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Q&A session today. So interesting talk by Tony, Joanna's, two of our most senior consultants, and going back to the basics of why are you customers spending on software asset management, FinOps, measuring everything, and turning this into financial results and risk assessments. So I'm getting a question here, someone asking, can the tool track actual usage of authorization objects per user? Important question, yes. And of course, with the changes in SAP contracts, vital question, because SAP has turned into executing their so-called STAR assessment in many audits. So SAP Trusted Authorization Review. So whether you want it or not, you have to cope with that, and you have to analyze your roles and authorizations and the usage by every user. So in the course of last year, we implemented this in our tools too. In fact, a comparison between an assessment of licenses based on authorizations compared to what they actually do in the systems. So yes, you can do that. Getting back to that, we were talking about the FinOps approach to SAP, and I get a question here, which is, how about we are thinking of implementing FinOps in our company, meaning what happens if we want to start measuring the cloud? So business technology platform, say success factors, say Ariba, etc., all the other tools apart from that. So this is why we came out with a combined offering of a FinOps, specific FinOps tool for SAP and our managed services. We are implementing this in quite a lot of companies, although the offering is quite new. And it's been very successful since it came out end of last year. And so what we are seeing is basically an implementation time, depending on the company size, of something between 2 and 4 months, which is like an average time for many of the projects that we do. Of course, the bigger clients who have never optimized their licenses will need longer. Those who have already SAMQ or have run through some sort of optimization, they may be able to implement this within 2 months, but take an average of 3 months for such implementations. So what am I seeing here? The changes of the so-called SAP Cloud ERP now. So something that will affect the way we measure licenses in future, although the quickest affection here is, of course, on the SAP public cloud, what they called Grow with SAP until just Sapphire, and now it's called SAP Cloud ERP. And Rise with SAP becoming SAP Cloud ERP Private. So we will have some changes there. We are adapting the tools to that. We will see new user types coming specifically on the public cloud, where we are not doing that much yet, because most of clients are just below the typical customer size that we work with. And we are right now assessing how to change the license assessments and measurements to match for the new licensing models attached to SAP Cloud ERP Private. So you'll see something coming there. So what SAP versions I'm reading does your product support? And I need to open this. And does your tool support non-ABAP systems? So, well, in the meantime, we have a couple of products. If we talk about the pure license management tool for on-premise systems, we are talking about SAMQ. SAMQ is an ABAP extension. It's an ABAP add-on that you installed on Solution Manager, and it connects via RFP to all ABAP systems. With that said, we are only measuring ABAP systems there. FinOps, so VisorQ FinOps Manager, on the other hand, allows you to connect to the SAP for Me measurements on the cloud, on the customer's cloud, and this access BTP, success factors, Ariba, SAP Analytics Cloud, whatever is whatever you have contracted. But on top of that, you can also import XMLs, such as the HANA database XML produced by the SAP HANA Studio, etc. And so consolidate any kind of measurements with SAP. So again, SAMQ is only ABAP. Yes, it's mostly on-premise or a Rise with SAP private cloud, now called SAP Cloud ERP Private. This is what you can measure with it. Mostly only ABAP systems, although you won't anyway find many users on a process orchestrator or a GRC system. GRC, well, we can connect to this one at ABAP, sorry for that, but the process orchestrator, for instance, is not. There we wouldn't be able to lead a measurement. But with the FinOps Manager, VisorQ FinOps Manager, you can measure anything else. And I think with this, we have answered everything that came. Thank you very much for joining us today, and please feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions. In case it wasn't shown, my mail address is francisco.hansen@voquslabs.com. You can also find our contact emails on our website, of course. Just feel free to approach us with your particular specific questions and your particular situation, and we'll be glad to help you out there. Thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. See you soon. Bye.